Welcome to the PowerPoint presentation for the informative speech. You should be watching this presentation to get you ready for the demonstration speech, and you may want to review this to prepare you or remind you of things that you need to know for the informative lecture speech. We're going to be focusing on introductions. So this is to help you not only write your outline, but also to write the speech itself, what you're actually going to be saying. And I'd like to start with why do we have an introduction in the first place? And there are actually 4 reasons or purposes of an introduction. The first is to acquaint the audience with the speaker's voice. As you're speaking, we're adjusting our hearing, getting used to how fast you speak or how loudly you speak. If you have an accent or a dialect that we need to adjust for, that's happening while you're saying the introduction. And since, as you're going to learn in a few minutes, there's a lot of important information that's covered in the introduction, if a speaker is too quiet or they speak too quickly, an audience can miss a lot of important information and as a result may be confused for the rest of the speech. So it's always important to be a little extra loud and extra slow when you're speaking in your introduction. The second purpose is to generate interest in the speech, to get people excited about the topic. They can't wait to hear more. And so your introduction needs to have that quality where it'll grab their attention. Third, we wish to lead into the topic smoothly, so you don't want an introduction that is abrupt or confusing. And last, the fourth purpose is to create goodwill between the speaker and the listener. And basically that means don't tick people off in the first 30 seconds of your speech. I had a student years ago whose opening line for his speech on biases was to tell the audience that they're all racists. And it certainly grabbed their attention, but not in a good way. People really weren't too interested in listening to anything more he had to say, even though he had some good points to offer. It was wasted on that audience. So choose your introduction wisely. The first element of your introduction, meaning the first thing that you're actually going to say to the audience, and it's going to be the first line on your outline, is the attention-getting device. And this is a sentence or two that's designed to grab and keep the audience's attention. It's your hook. So how are you going to do that? Well, there's lots of techniques available. One of the more popular ones is you can open with a story or an anecdote, something fairly brief, concise, but it can be a real story, something that happened to you or somebody you know. It could be a story that you got from your research, maybe something you saw in the news or read in a magazine. Or it can be a hypothetical, kind of a what-if scenario that you can use to pull people into the topic. Asking a question is also a very popular attention-getting device technique. And there are 2 types of questions that can work for this. One is rhetorical, where you don't expect the audience to respond, you just simply want them thinking about what you just asked them. Or you have an overt response question, where you do want people to raise their hands or shout out answers. I had one student who asked his audience, "How many of you think you are radioactive?" And one person raised their hand, and he said, "You're right, everybody is." And obviously you know the topic of his speech, but it was certainly an interesting question to ask people. The example I have right below here on the screen was an opener for a speech on tennis, and it was certainly a nice rhetorical question, something a little unusual, and a nice play on words, so very effective. You can begin by relating a startling fact or a shocking statistic, something that would surprise the audience, and if you can involve the audience in the statistic, make them part of the number. For example, statistics are showing that most students, when they graduate with their bachelor's degree, have on average $25,000 worth of debt. Certainly relevant for your audience if you're speaking in a college classroom, but a definite shocking statistic. You can open the speech with a quote. Keep the quote fairly short and concise. If it goes on too long, it can be a little hard to follow or confusing. You do not need to say quote, unquote. And obviously when you tell us who you're quoting, we know that this is somebody else's words. A visual aid, an audio aid, or some kind of physical action is another option for an attention-getting device. A clip from a movie or a piece of music. Sometimes either you performing a physical action like a short karate demonstration or getting the audience involved in some sort of physical action would be an interesting way to open up a presentation. The ever popular open with a joke is certainly one possibility. A couple of questions you need to ask yourself. One, is your joke funny? Two, can you tell a joke? If you can't, don't do this option. It's not for you. And third, make sure your joke has something to do with your topic. Otherwise, you can save it for after your speech. Creating curiosity is a little different in terms of an attention-getting device. Up until now, all the examples I've given you sort of reveal the topic to the audience. We have a pretty good idea of what you're going to be speaking on. However, creating curiosity does the opposite. It's intriguing because it's not revealing the topic, and people are wondering and have the sense of mystery as to what you're talking about. For example, a student opened up his speech by saying to the audience, I want to tell you about a substance that is as old as the pharaohs of Egypt. It is considered an aphrodisiac by many. It was used as a form of money in some cultures, and we still consume this substance today. What is it? And people had many guesses, but the correct answer was beer. And his speech was on how to home brew beer, but one of the main points in the body of the speech was he talked about the history and how they found recipes for beer on papyrus scrolls entombed with pharaohs, etc. So it was a great hook, and it certainly built up that curiosity that he was going for. The last option listed is kind of a good old standby, reference to yourself, reference to the audience, or reference to the occasion. If you've ever attended a graduation and listened to a graduation speaker, or maybe a retirement dinner, or a birthday party, or a funeral, this is a common way of beginning, and it usually makes reference to the people in the audience or why they are all gathered there, and it can work very well. You can certainly combine any one of these devices, or if you have an idea of your own that you think meets the purposes of an introduction and will make a great opening line, please feel free to use it. The second element of an introduction, the second thing that you're going to be saying in your speech, is a need-to-know step. And this is where you emphasize to the audience why the topic is relevant to them. Let's face it, when we're listening to a lecture or a speech or a presentation, usually the first thing we're thinking is, so what? How does this information help me? Why should I listen? You want to answer that question for your audience right away and get them to stop thinking, so what, and be interested in hearing more. How do you do that? Well, the need-to-know step can take the form of a quote, a statistic, or you can put it in your own words if you'd like, and you're basically answering that question for your audience. I had a student who did a speech on CPR and had a statistic from the American Red Cross that said that the number of people who have a heart attack and survive, a large number of it is due to the fact that someone on the scene knew CPR, that they didn't have to wait for the paramedics to arrive. And another student who was taking on a more fun topic of how to prune your rose bush, and she was a horticulture major, and her need to know was she had called florists in the area and asked them how much they charge for a dozen roses, especially on holidays like Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, and found that the price ranged from $90 to $120 for a bouquet of roses. And she turned to the audience and said, you can grow your own roses pretty much 10 months out of the year in California, so you can create your own bouquets and save yourself a whole lot of money. So the need to know could be financial. This could save you money or earn you money. It could be a life or death situation, or it could protect you from a disease or from harm. It could be something fun to do. You're teaching us about a new hobby or sport, or introducing us to a band or a new form of music that maybe we don't know a lot about. And so the need to know could be entertainment or enjoyment. It's fine, and keep it fairly brief, but this will reinforce the attention-getting device and keep people involved in your speech. The third element is the thesis sentence. Up until now, people probably have a good idea of what your topic is, but they may not know how exactly you're going to focus on that topic. Sometimes topics can be very broad and you need to narrow it down, and the thesis will reflect what direction you're going in. So it needs to be concise. It's a sentence or two, no more than that. But if you can word it creatively, that's a plus. I really want you to avoid the phrase, "my topic is," or "today I'm going to talk about." That's pretty clunky writing, it's not very sophisticated, and you can do better than that. I had an example of a student from years ago who, the topic was fine, she was doing her speech on Metallica, but the thesis sentence was really not very effective. It was a run-on sentence, it was a little too obvious, and had some slang in there that it needed some polishing. So you want to avoid writing like the example you see below. Here are some examples of thesis sentences that are very nice. They're subtle, they're nicely worded, but they're very clear. We know exactly what the topic is, we know where they're going with this subject, and so you can see a variety of writing styles, but the thesis works really well. The fourth and final element of the introduction is the initial summary. It's also known as the preview. So you may hear me refer to it as a preview more often than not, but both terms are correct. And what this is the roadmap to the rest of your speech. You are going to list for the audience the main points of the body of the speech in the order that you're going to cover them. Now in about 2 seconds you're going to be in the body of the speech talking about your main points, so why do you think you need to preview them for the audience? How's that going to help them? Well, one is it helps the audience listen more effectively. If they know what's coming, what the main ideas are, they'll first of all pay attention when those come up, and second, retain that information a little bit better. People's listening skills may not be the best, and they may lag out or get distracted, and if they miss a main point, they could miss a good portion of your speech or be a little confused. So it's important to reinforce that as often as you can. It also generates interest in the information that's coming up. They hear your topic, they get excited, oh, I wanted to know more about that, I hope they're going to cover X, and then they learn in your preview that yes, that's your second main point. So great, they're going to be anticipating that and paying attention, looking forward to that information. It helps the speaker stay organized. When you preview the main points, it acts as a verbal note card. It reminds you of what you're talking about and in what order. It also reassures the audience that you've got a plan, that you're organized, you're not going to get up here and ramble for 5 minutes, which is every audience's fear. So it has a lot of advantages. It also acts as a nice transition into the body of the speech. So how can you word your preview? So there, you can be straight up and say, first I'm going to talk about this, next we're going to cover that, and finally we're going to discuss such and such. That's perfectly fine and is very, very clear. If you want to get a little bit more creative, which I encourage you to do, you can use things like metaphors. I had a student who was giving an informative speech on the prima ballerina Margot Fonteyn and said, we will look at her life from cradle to grave. And that clued us in that it was a chronological organizational pattern, but every transition in the body of the speech went back to that image, and so we knew exactly where we were in this woman's life as well as where we were in the speech. And it was very effective. You can use humor or puns. I had a student who gave a speech on drag racing, and her preview was laced with things like, we're going to step on the gas, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about this. Finally, we're going to race ahead and discuss this. It was clever. It went with the speech, and people really liked it. Somebody else did a speech on sneaker collecting and used the same sort of language about tying up the loose ends and the soul of the topic, etc., using shoe terminology to list the main points of the body. I've had other students use alliteration, so all of their main points began with the same letter. Others used rhetorical questions to introduce the different topics of the body to the audience. There are some optional items that you can include in an introduction if you want to. They're not required, like the 4 elements that I just discussed. And one may be your expertise with the topic. You hopefully are picking a subject that you're excited about and maybe have some knowledge already in. If you're doing a speech on CPR and you've been a lifeguard for the last 3 years, that would be good information to include. Maybe you're doing a speech on Fender guitars and you're a musician and have played guitar for the last 10 years. Tell people about that. We're curious about why you pick the topic you do, and it also gives you a bit more credibility because this is something you know fairly well. Another thing that you could include in an introduction is a quick definition of a term or the topic itself. As long as it doesn't go on too long, the introduction is a perfect spot for giving us a quick definition so we're all on the same page. If, however, the definition is lengthy because what you're defining is complicated, say it's a theory or it's a concept, it would be better to make the definition the first main point of the body of your speech. If it's going to take you, say, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes to really adequately define this concept and give examples, that doesn't belong in the introduction. That will go on too long. So move it into the body. Last, I have some words of advice for you. The introduction should not take longer than 1 minute of your speaking time. It really is a teaser. You're setting the audience up for what is to come in the body of the speech. If I were to use a food metaphor, or this is a meal, the introduction is really the appetizer. You're just giving us a taste, getting us to anticipate what's to come, but the main entree, the main course, is the body of the speech where you're going to go into much more detail. So keep the introduction fairly concise. If your introduction does go longer than a minute, either one of two things is happening. You're going into way too much detail and you're actually putting content in the introduction that belongs in the body, so you need to shift things down. Or your entire speech is over time and you're just way too wordy and you need to edit a lot of that unnecessary detail. My last piece of advice may seem a little counterintuitive, but it actually does work. Write the introduction last. Anyone who's ever stared at a blank computer screen or a blank piece of paper trying to get that first sentence out and being incredibly frustrated knows that it's not always easy to get started. The introduction really will write itself if the body of the speech is planned out. So even just outlining what you want to cover as main points in the body of the speech and in what order takes care of a couple of elements of the introduction. Your thesis and your initial summary are pretty much done. You know what your subject is and you know what you're going to talk about as main points. In your research or reading on the subject, you may have come across a really great story or a quote that you can use as an attention-getting device. And you may also have come across a really cool statistic, or in your own words, you can create a need to know. Why is the topic relevant for your audience? So you see that the introduction really snaps together fairly quickly once the body of the speech is figured out. So that's why I recommend doing it last. That's all the information I have for you in terms of introductions. Your next video, PowerPoint presentation, will be on the writing of the body of the speech. So please definitely check that out before you get started preparing your demonstration speech. Thank you.